Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. In today's archive video, we have esteemed researcher and astrologer Dr. Ronald Tiggle presenting the promise of fractal progressions and directions and the changes required before they can be achieved. Coming up, we have a number of fantastic workshops and webinars, so if you'd like to learn more, please visit KeplerCollege.org. And lastly, our Leaders in Astrology series begins this month. I'll be interviewing Bernadette Brady, Rick Levine, Michael Luton, and other legendary astrologers. So keep an eye out for that series. So without further ado, let's get into the video.
Well, good afternoon again, folks. I'm happy to be here today to share some information with you that I think will help you a lot. So what are solar arc directions and secondary progressions? I'm sure most of you really have a background in this, but this part will be very brief. There are proportional periods of time based on astronomical phenomena. For example, 1 day is equal to 1 year. And progressions are like slow transits, and solar arcs move at the rate of the progress sun. And they were mentioned by Kepler and popularized by Placidus in the 17th century and Galileo in the early 20th century. Now, Placidus used secondaries as an auxiliary to primary directions. Okay, what do progressions and solar arc directions represent? They represent the possibilities of individual growth within limits of the potential mapped by the natal chart during a specific time. Unfolding consciousness, according to the Tibetan master, or the life of the soul and its inflow through the personality, according to Galileo. They also represent ripe karma, that is, the effects of past actions, thoughts, and feelings, both positive and negative, that attract events and situations to build character and expand our consciousness. And of course, they represent opportunities for growth as a function of your consciousness, choices, and discernment in service of what I call the prime directive, the perfection of the divine archetype within. Most of us are familiar, I'm sure all astrologers are familiar with the Hermetic principle. So how does the Hermetic principle relate to fractals? The Hermetic principle, as above, so below. Man is a microcosm of the macrocosm, that the whole is reflected in its parts. And from this, we get many subdivisions of the zodiac. We can reflect the entire zodiac within one sign. That is known as the Dwadasamsas, and there are many other subdivisions. And of course, in harmonic astrology, we divide the zodiac by various whole numbers. And as the chart shows below, we can reflect the zodiac within you. And a moment in time can be equated to many different time frames: a lifetime, the natal chart, a year, progress charts, etc., or lunar month, or a day, transits. In the 1980s, fractal theory has been used by some physicists to explain the nature of the universe and by some astrologers to explain astrology. Fractals are infinitely complex patterns that are self-similar across different scales. This means that the whole pattern is contained in every part, and they are created through a simple mathematical formula that is repeated on different scales, and they appear everywhere in nature. Fractal theory is a modern restatement of the Hermetic principle in more mathematically precise language, and this is an important insight that we use later on to rescale solar day to its appropriate proportions in order to calculate secondaries and solar arcs correctly. The fern leaf is an example of a fractal that is identical at every scale. The whole is reflected in its parts. Let me get my little pointer out here. All right. And so we look at the fern leaf here. We notice that the whole fern leaf is reflected on the stems in a very symmetrical way. So we can imagine that the whole leaf might be the natal chart, and this stem could be secondary progressions, and here on a slightly smaller scale, this could be tertiary progressions. And so we see this principle of the fractals being represented on different scales. So what is the promise of fractal progressions and directions? Since fractals are proportionate across different scales, using fractal theory appropriately will enable astrologers to potentially develop an infinite number of progressions and direction formulas in addition to the standard method of tertiary progression formulas that are currently widely used. We could have 4 days equal year, 7, 12, 52, 144 days equal 1 year, or 1 year equal 84 years, or 36 years, or 108 years, etc. And these progressions and directions will be capable of producing precise results within 1 minute of arc, or approximately, or within a range of approximately 6 days, since they are proportioned across different scales. Now, this is based on this statement is based on some of the work that Edward Johndro did, which we'll look at later. How do solar arc directions and secondary progressions relate to fractals? The Hermetic principle tells us that a day can be equated to a year, but fractal theory enables us to determine whether a sidereal day or a solar day can be mathematically equated to a year, because by its definition, a fractal is a precise mathematical function that maintains its proportionality when calculated on different scales. An example of an astrological fractal is 1 day equals 365.24 days. In astrology, we have 2 types of days, a sidereal day and a slightly longer solar day. Now, Johndro recommended that astrologers equate a sidereal day equal to 1 year rather than the standard method of equating a solar day equal to 1 year. Unfortunately, he did not bother to explain why. He said it was beyond the scope of the book, but it is my task today to explain why his suggestion is quite valid. An example of a sidereal day as a fractal is the equating of the 360-degree diurnal rotation of a sidereal day. Actually, I should be diurnal revolution of a sidereal day with a 360-degree revolution of the sun's apparent motion through the tropical zodiac in 365.24 days. In this system of progressions, the transiting sun returns to its natal place on the exact day when the sidereal day's progress midheaven returns to its natal place in 365.24 days. In astrology, this is known, of course, as the solar return. In contrast, the standard method is equating the 360-degree diurnal rotation of a solar day with the 360-degree revolution of the sun's apparent motion through the tropical zodiac in 365.24 days. The above statement is suspect because astrologers know that from one solar day to the next, the midheaven at noon will move at the rate of the transiting sun. In this case, the sun will complete its solar revolution 1 degree before the progress date completes its 361-degree diurnal rotation. But astrologers calculate the solar day as if it is equal to a year when it is equal to 1 day longer due to its 1 degree longer diurnal rotation. It's equal to 366.24 days rather than 365.24 days. Many astrologers have embraced fractals, but are making the same error that other astrologers have been making by equating a solar day equal to 1 year, rather than when in reality a sidereal day is equal to 1 year, and when correctly rescaled, a solar day is equal to 366.24 days. Thus, rather than equating 365.24 days equal 84 years, in the case of solar days, we need to rescale it to 366.24 days equal 84 years. And part of my task during this presentation is to show you why that's correct. So what changes are required to realize the promise of fractals? According to L. Edward Johndro and Cyril Fagan, astrologers have been calculating secondary progression charts and solar arcs incorrectly. Now, Edward Johndro was a well-known tropical astrologer, and he was the one who actually recommended this. But Cyril Fagan was a sidereal astrologer, and he picked up on it and embraced it. And in fact, he gave it a name called Bija progressions. Now, Bija is a Sanskrit word that normally means seed, but he used it to mean correction, and so he called these corrected progressions, Bija progressions, and Bija solar arcs. Now, the error that astrologers have been making accumulates at the rate of 1 day per year of life. Progress aspects can be off by 60 days for someone 60 years old when the standard method is used. They become due 60 days too early for both secondary and tertiary progressions and solar arc directions. And the progress moon can be off by as much as 3 months in natal charts and in mundane charts of countries several hundred years old, 7 or more degrees. For example, the secondary progressions and solar arc directions for the USA, born in 1776, would be off for 2021 by 245 days. Now, many years ago, the Church of Light did extensive statistical research on secondary progressions, and they accurately found that the progress moon was not a reliable timer of events when the standard method of solar day was used. Now, that should have been the canary in the coal mine to suggest to them that either the Hermetic principle doesn't really work, or that something was wrong with the way they were calculating secondary progressions. But they didn't pick up on that. So why was this a problem? We know that fractal theory works. So let's see what's going on here. The reason why the standard method of equating a solar day equal year is incorrect is that due to its 360-degree diurnal rotation, it can't accurately equate to the yearly 360-degree revolution of the Earth around the Sun. When Johndro's method, a sidereal day equal a year, is used, the progress moon becomes a reliable timer. And actually, I have an example of this later on when we look at charts. Now, Cyril Fagan noted that a sidereal day equal a year should be used independent of which zodiac you prefer. And the reason why that statement is correct is because the correct calculation is not dependent upon whether you're a tropical using the tropical zodiac or sidereal zodiac. It's just purely based on the difference in the diurnal rotation between a sidereal day and a solar day. Now, this error also applies to Van Dam primaries, since the timing for these are derived from the secondary progress chart. Minor progressions, that is, a lunar day is equal to a month, are not affected by this problem since they are not based on days and should be calculated by the method recommended by C.C. Zane and the Church of Light. Sadly, even though this error was identified 92 years ago by Johndro in the book The Earth and the Heavens, page 118, most astrologers and astrology textbooks are still teaching the incorrect standard method of solar day equal 1 year for computing secondary progressions and solar arc directions. Some astrologers have been aware that the standard method of calculating secondary progressions and solar arcs become less accurate with age, but did not know why. In fact, one of your faculty members, Robert Glasscock, has mentioned in his talks on solar arcs that he had observed that solar arcs become less accurate over time, but he didn't know why or what the magnitude of the error was or how to correct it. And other astrologers have also made the same observation, but they didn't know why that was the problem. Currently, there are some astrology programs that provide an option for Bija progressions or an option to add your own progression. For example, Horoscope 2020 from the Church of Light, the Janus software, Halloran software, Kepler 8 and Nova Chart Wheels, and Prometheus, Sirius, Solar Fire, and Windstar, but others do not as of November 2021. For instance, Astro Gold and Time Passages at the present time do not offer the Bija-corrected secondary progressions and solar arcs. Now, I have written Astro Gold, and they told me that they would add it if customers ask for it. Now, Astro Gold is published by Solar Fire, and Solar Fire has always had the option for Bija progressions. So it would be very easy for them to add that. I've also reached out to Time Passages, haven't heard back from them yet. But I would recommend that if you're interested, if you have those programs and would like to use the Bijou option, please write them and request it. Unfortunately, it will take many decades to update astrology books and to change curriculum in astrological schools. However, astrological software manufacturers can greatly accelerate this process by making the correct procedure the default. And users like you can request the Bijou options be added to those programs that currently do not have an option. Now, I have been corresponding with David Cochran, and he actually spent 2 years testing whether Bijou corrected solar arcs were more accurate than uh, uh, calculating them using a solar day, and he agrees with the same findings that I have. His research showed that indeed the Bijou corrected progressions and solar arcs work more accurately than those based on the solar day. As I mentioned earlier, I became aware of the Bijou corrected progressions actually in 2010 after I let that book I got from about Johndro sit on my shelf for 37 years. What really piqued my interest is I became aware of the error when I tested his technique on my secondary progressions for a job promotion. In that particular case, the progress midheaven was conjunct my natal sun. And using the standard method, it produced the exact error that Johndro said it would. The progression was exact 43 days too early when I was about 42 and a half years old. And when Johndro's method was used, a sidereal day equal a year, the progression was exact on the day my promotion became effective. And one of the nice things about this is I worked for the federal government, and so when you get a promotion, they issue you a form that your promotion becomes effective on such and such a date, and that was the date that aspect was exact was the date that my promotion became effective. So that really got my interest in this technique big time. So who was Edward Johndro? He was one of the most brilliant astrologers of the 20th century. Johndro was a mathematician, a physicist, and a radio engineer. He taught the first two subjects professionally. He also taught astrology too. Now, Johndro developed a successful system for forecasting commodities based upon eclipses while working for W.D. Gann, who was a very well-known financier in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And he discovered an electrical descendant today known as the vertex, which is also known in astrology as the West Point. The vertex is the intersection of the prime vertical with the ecliptic in the west, and it is associated with the fated encounters. Now, Johndro was an empirical astrologer who verified all techniques that he proposed. So we'll take a look at some of Johndro's techniques. He criticized some of the faulty methods of directions and progressions that some astrologers use that were not based on what he considered to be sound astronomical principles, such as directing angles by the Ptolemaic arc, that is, 1 degree method, and a solar day equal year. Now, of course, the 1 degree method is a handy tool to use when you're sitting with a client and you're estimating when events might have occurred, but for doing precise work, you really need to use the true solar arc. And of course, he recommended that we should use a sidereal day equal a year for progressions rather than a solar day. He maintained also that solar arcs should be calculated in both right ascension and ecliptic longitude, and that one does not supplant the other. He maintained that there was a qualitative difference between two arcs. Solar arcs in right ascension timed events, while ecliptic arcs showed the reaction to the events. One event could precede the other, or they could occur together. For example, the solar arc generated by right ascension could represent a fire in a theater. The solar arc generated from the ecliptic produced the public's reaction to the fire and a demand for greater safety. If the ecliptic solar arc occurred first, there would be a public demand for greater safety in theaters followed by a fire. Or the two could become exact at the same time, leading to the fire and the public reaction being simultaneous. Johndro also used direct and converse solar arcs. And he had much tighter orbs for his solar arcs. He saw that due to the planetary latitude and the inclination of planetary orbits to the ecliptic, aspects to the same system of directing could repeat many times, so the effect of an aspect by direction could be spread over a period of time. Therefore, he left a time orb. He allowed a time orb of duration of 6 days for interplanetary aspects. Because the diameter of the Sun was 16 minutes and that of the Moon was 15 minutes, the time orb for direction involving the lights was 3 months. And solar arcs became a prime tool in rectification, especially for directing Uranus to the angles. He always worked with rectified charts. Charles Jane also used small orbs, similar to Johndro. In fact, Charles Jane and Johndro corresponded extensively, although they never met personally. Traditionally, astrologers have used a 1-degree orb applying and separating for solar arcs and secondary progressions, although some other astrologers feel that that orb is far too wide. Nancy Hastings, in her book on secondary progressions, A Time to Remember, suggested that perhaps for precision work, one should use an orb of about 15 minutes. So let's take a deeper dive into Johndro's concept of planetary orbs. Now, Johndro was a mathematician and a physicist, and these disciplines influenced his ideas about astrology. For example, he stated that, and I've only seen this written in one place in about 50 years. He stated that in all astrological work, aspects obey Newton's law. That is, the strength of any aspect deviating from partile varies in all cases inversely as the square of the orb of the distance. And so a partile aspect is 100% efficient for good or ill, whereas, say, a natal chart, a 5-degree orb aspect, in this case, it would be 100 divided by 5 squared, and that means that a 5-degree orb aspect only has an efficiency of 4%. And so that's only bank interest towards the capital event. I think that in many ways, since after all, astrology is based on astronomy, that a more objective way to assess planetary aspect power in natal charts and also in progressions in progressions also would be using Newton's inverse square law. Similar recommendations on orbs for major natal aspects were made by Eleanor Gemmell, Stephen Arroyo, and Maritha Pottinger. They also agreed that the widest aspects should be for the major aspects, such as the trines and the sextiles and squares, should be about 5 degrees orb, and that we should focus more on the 1, 2, and 3 degree orb planets. And keep in mind that using the inverse square law, that a planet that has a 2-degree orb based on Newton's inverse square law would only have a 25% efficiency, and that's 2 squared, 4 into 100 is 25%. So that shows you just how fast the power falls. Now, as we observed on the previous slide, Johndro used a much tighter orbs for solar arc directions and progressions. And the reason he did that was based on Newton's inverse square law. I think in the case of progressions and directions, he substituted minutes rather than degrees. And that's how he arrived at these much tighter orbs. So what is the definition of a sidereal day? A sidereal day is the time it takes for the Earth to rotate about its axis so that the distant stars appear in the same position in the sky. In terms of the zodiac, a sidereal day can be defined as the interval between two successive transits of the first point of Aries over the upper meridian or midheaven of any place. And in astrological software, this method is known as Q1. So a sidereal day consists of one complete 360-degree diurnal rotation, and a sidereal day of 24 hours of sidereal time lasts 23 hours, 56 minutes, 4.09 seconds of solar time. So the bottom line for this slide is that a sidereal day has a diurnal rotation of 360 degrees, and a solar day has a diurnal rotation of 361 degrees. So we want to keep that in mind. Now, an ephemeris is calculated from one solar day to the next solar day, but all calculations are done in sidereal time. Then we can adjust the number of days a sidereal day equals to make it proportionate to a sidereal day. So calculations of progressions in solar arc directions. So in terms of secondary progressions, Johndro recommended that a sidereal day should be equated to 1 year rather than a solar day. This recommendation implies that the 360-degree diurnal rotation of a sidereal day can be equated to the annual 360-degree apparent revolution of the Sun through the tropical zodiac in 365.24 days. Traditionally, a solar day, which has a diurnal rotation of 361 degrees, has been equated to the annual 360-degree apparent revolution of the Sun through the tropical zodiac in 365.24 days. Now, both of these cannot be correct. But we can use the principle of fractals to scale a solar day in proportion to a sidereal day. This rescaling enables us to use a regular ephemeris which is calculated in sidereal time. And so we know now that a solar day is slightly shorter than a sidereal day. And we in order to find out how many days to confirm that a solar day is really equal to 366.24 days, we have to create a proportion. We have to look at the ratio between a sidereal day to a solar day. And so we form this proportion, a sidereal day to a solar day. If we have that ratio, we know that a sidereal day is equal to 365 and a quarter days. And we want to know what a solar day is equal to. So that's D day, D calendar days. So that's an unknown. And we know that the ratio of a sidereal day to a solar day is 0.997269566. And then we simply just find out what D is, and we arrive that D turns out to be 366.242 days. So we find out that a solar day is really equal to 366.2422 days and not 365.242 days. Notice that there is exactly 1 day difference between the two. And so this gives us the mathematical proof that that a solar day is really equal to 366 and a quarter days. Thus, when a person is 1 year old, the current calendar day for the progress date will be 1 day past the birthday. And when they are 2 years old, the current calendar date for the progress birth date will be 2 days past the birthday. And at 50 years old, the current calendar date for the progress birth date will be 50 days past the birthday. And the ratio of a sidereal day to a solar day is that I found is also used in astrological software, specifically Solar Fire and Sirius. So these two tables really summarize where the area is, and hopefully you'll be able to see it very clearly once we go through these tables. Now, Table 1 shows why secondary and tertiary progressions and solar arc directions become due one day earlier than they should with each passing year, so that by the time you're 60 years old, your progressions and directions are 60 days off, and they were coming due 60 days too soon. So let's take a look at Table 1. Table 1 is the standard method. Here we assume that a solar day is equal to 365.24 days. So a solar day is assumed to be equal to 365.24 days, but is really equal to 366.24 days because of its longer diurnal rotation. So therefore, I wrote here, the progress day here is equal to 366.24 calendar days. But when we look at the calendar days for this person who's born on March 21st, we're assuming that from one progress to the next progress day, it will occur on the person's birthday, because we're assuming that that one progress day is equal to 1 year. But that's not true. And now in Table 2, we have the Bayesian method. We have the correct number of calendar days that a progress day is equal to, 366.24 calendar days, and then we adjust the calendar days appropriate to that. And so we see that in Table 1, from one birthday to the next, one progress day to the next progress day, will start on the birthday. So at 1 year old, this person's progress day will occur on the birthday. But using the Bayesian method, because it's actually 1 year plus 1 day, when we go to the next progress day, it's 1 day past the birthday. And the next year after that, it's going to be 2 days past the birthday, and so forth and so on. So this is really the key slide that really highlights that error. We assume that we have 365 and a quarter days equal a year for progress day, and we set it equal to 365.24 days. But in reality, we have something that is not really equivalent here. We're setting a progress day equal to 1 year, and we're setting the calendar days equal to 1 year, but really this is one day past that. So the error that astrologers have been making is setting a solar day equal to 1 year when it is really equal to 366.25 days due to this longer diurnal rotation. And this chart, let me just magnify that a little bit. Let me get the magnifier here. And so we see here on March 21st, John Q, and then here we show that the progress date is March 22nd, just as was shown in the previous table. So notice that the dates in the ephemeris below are the same as the dates in Table 2 for the current calendar date of the birth date. This reflects a diurnal rotation of 361 degrees, which equates to 366.24 days. Notice that the sidereal time exceeds 24 hours from one solar day to the next. We're looking at this table here, the sidereal time, while the dates listed under the age column over here reflect the current calendar dates based on the standard method. In fact, a table like this can be found on page 228 of the Modern Textbook of Astrology by Margaret Hone. This is one of the astrology books I learned to do secondaries with. And this is showing what we now know is the incorrect method. And this is being taught today in most of the astrology books. Now, experience demonstrates that astrologers have greater accuracy when they use symbolic progressions and directions that have an accurate astronomical basis. For example, as above, so below suggests that we use the actual data provided by astronomy for determining solar arc, that is, true solar arc versus the mean arc, also known as Nibald arc. I mention this because I've run across occasionally some professional astrologers who are still using Naibold arc, which is the mean solar arc, rather than the true solar arc. So why should they not use the mean solar arc? And the reason for that is because the Earth, as the Earth moves around the Sun, it does not have a circular orbit. And if you were to use the mean arc, it kind of implies a circular orbit. The Earth actually has an elliptical orbit, and because of that, some parts of the year it moves faster than others. It moves a little slower during the summer. And so for that reason, to control for that, you have to use a true solar arc. Now, tertiary progressions also need to be corrected. And the reason for that is because they're also based on the solar day. So one solar day is equal to a lunar month. And this just shows how you would correct the solar arc. How you would correct the tertiary progression. And we see that it's going to be slightly longer. And we know from previous comment that minor progressions, one lunar month equal year, are not affected by this error. The Bija correction does not need to be applied. And in this progression, the yearly 360-degree transit of the Sun through the zodiac is equated to the 360-degree monthly lunar return. Thus, the correct scaling is maintained. So the minor progressions should be calculated as suggested by the Church of Light system and C.C. Zane and Doris Chase Doan. So now let's look at some charts. Theories and techniques stand or fall based on data and not rationalization or not theories. Theories always must be tested by data. So we'll look at a few charts. Now this first chart is, whoops, we don't want to see that. I don't know how that could look. So this is the difference between the Bija corrected secondary progression at age 30 years. Notice the difference between the moon. It's about 1 degree difference, the progress moon between the two. And in this particular example, the difference between the progress sun is 4 minutes. On average, it'll be about 5 minutes at age 30. So there's a 5-minute error at age 30, but that 5-minute error is equivalent to 30 days. So there's an error of 30 days here. And in this example, when we compare the standard and the Bija corrected tertiary progression at age 60, we notice that the distance between the sun, the difference between the standard method and the Bija corrected method for the progress sun is about 2 degrees at age 60, and the tertiary progress moon is off by 27 degrees. Here we have the progress moon is 29, Gemini 28, Gemini 29, and over here the progress moon is only 2 degrees, 47 minutes, Gemini. So it's a big difference. And of course, this is the US Sibley chart, and there's a 244-day difference. The progress sun is off by 40 minutes, and all the calculations would be off by 244 days. The positions of the other planets don't really change much. And let's see if we can magnify that. Make it a little easier for people to see. Okay, so here we look at, in table 3, this shows the average progress sun errors at age 30 for progressions based on solar days. So the average errors for the progress sun at age 30 equals a 30-day error. And for the secondary progress sun, that would be about 5 minutes in ecliptic longitude. For the tertiary progress sun at age 30, that would be about 67 minutes. And if we were using some other progressions like 12 days equal a year or 52 days equal a year, we see that the error becomes much larger, although it still remains 30 days off. I think one of the reasons why some of the higher number of progress days per year have not become popular is because using the standard method, they create much larger error. Here we see that if you're using 52 days equal 1 year, the progress sun is going to be off 4 degrees and 20 minutes, so it would be useless. However, when you use the Bija corrected version of these, they should work quite accurately. Now, since the average daily motion of the moon is 13.2 degrees, by age 30, the secondary progress moon would have an average error of approximately 1 degree 6 minutes. And so when we look at the secondary progress moon, it's going to be about 1 degree 6 minutes off at age 30. And of course, you can double that for age 60, which we saw in a previous chart. In tertiary progressions, the progress moon is going to be off 14 degrees at age 30, and also 30 calendar days off. And if you're using 12 days equal year or 52 days equal year, you'll have an even larger error. Now, this is an example of a relationship breakup. I shared the technique of Bija progression and solar arcs with another fellow astrologer, and he used it to examine the day that his girlfriend decided to break up with him. So Lady X announced that she was moving out on the day that the progress moon was in the 5th house. And let me magnify this. Well, if I in a minute here, I'll do that. Progress moon was in the 5th house, exactly square her progress Uranus, and triggered the natal sun square Uranus aspect and the progress Venus opposition natal Uranus on May 17th. Now, the standard method was exact 53 days earlier, since she is 53 years old. And let me magnify that a little bit. And so here we see the progress moon is 9 degrees 22 minutes Gemini, and it was exactly squaring Uranus, which was progress Uranus, which was 9 degrees 22 minutes Virgo, on the day she decided that she was going to move out. And we notice that in this particular chart, natally, the sun was square Uranus, and there was also a progress Venus opposition going on around that time too. So this when the progress moon moved into this aspect, it set off a cardinal cross, not a mutable cross, rather. So this was a prime example of how, when you use the Bija corrected progression, the progress moon does indeed become an accurate timer of events. And so we now can be assured that the Hermetic principle remains intact. Now, this next example, this was showing when I got a promotion. My progress in midheaven was conjunct my natal sun in the Bija progression on the day the promotion was effective. In the standard method, it was exact 43 days earlier, on June 18th. Now, keep in mind, I did not know about this technique until 2010. So let's take a look at this. Let's see if we can make this a little bigger. Magnify this a little bit. So here we see my natal sun, 2820 Aquarius, and there's the midheaven, 2820 Aquarius, on the date that it was exact. And this was the standard method here. The progress midheaven was 7 minutes past that, which equated to 43 days. So what this is demonstrating is the level of precision that you can get with solar arcs and secondaries when you calculate them correctly. And so when you calculate them correctly, you can use much tighter orbs. Now this next slide, this was, let me magnify this. This was when I began to date the person the first time who I was going to eventually marry. So this particular person, we went out as friends to a museum. I wasn't really dating her and didn't really anticipate anything was going to happen, though I was hopeful because I liked her. At that particular day, my solar arc Venus was forming a sextile to my natal sun. And in my chart, Venus is the ruler of my seventh house of marriage, was at Libra there on the seventh house. And it was exact on the day that we went out for the first time. And in the next slide, that October, around October 13th, 2002, when the solar arc Venus conjunct the ascendant, the relationship switched from a friendship to a romance. And I experienced the wonderful aspect of solar arc Venus conjunct my ascendant. So the rule of my seventh house conjunct my ascendant. And I eventually married this young lady. And on my wedding day, Progress Venus was trying my MC with a 1 minute orb on the wedding day using the Bija corrected method. Using the standard method, it was off by 59 days. In 2018, I was looking at my progress chart in October, and I noticed that my progress Venus was going to square my 11th house Venus on December 28th, and I thought that I might meet someone new, I might make a new friend during that time period. And I decided that I wasn't going to do anything special to try to make something happen, but I would just do a little experiment to see what would happen during this period. Well, I always go back to the DC area normally during the holidays, and I had lunch with an old Air Force buddy of mine who I usually see every time I go back to Washington. And suddenly on that particular visit, he decides to mention, he says, I have a friend who I would like you to meet. And so this aspect was exact on December 28th. And I had lunch with him on December 29th. And while I had lunch, he called his friend and set up a meeting, and I met her on December 30th. So this is just a demonstration of the kind of precision that you can get with these type of progressions. Now, if I use the standard method was exact 72 days earlier on October 16th. So it would have been useless for trying to time something, because at that time I was 72 years old. Another way to see this error is by examining the relationship between the natal diurnal chart, midheaven, and the Bija progress diurnal chart, midheaven, also known as a quotidian, which is a Greek name that simply means daily. Just as a diurnal chart can be calculated for each day after the birth from the natal chart, a progress diurnal chart can be calculated for each day during the year for the progress chart. In the case of the Bija progression chart, one sidereal day equal a year, the diurnal ascendant and the midheaven will always be nearly identical within a degree to the natal diurnal chart on the same date. The difference is due to true solar arc versus mean formula for the progress quotidian. In contrast, the progress diurnal chart using the standard calculation technique, one solar day equal year, will be off by as many days as a person's age in years. And this is simply just more evidence showing that they are incorrect. So here we have the natal diurnal chart, and I'll make this a little bit larger. It's a little hard for me to see, probably hard for you to see too. And here we see that the natal diurnal is 24 degrees and 53 minutes, and the progress diurnal is 24 degrees 37, and that slight difference is due to a mean calculations versus true solar arc. And now we're looking at the natal diurnal versus the standard progression. So let's make that a little larger. And sure enough, the natal diurnal is 24 degrees Cancer, 53 minutes, and the standard progress diurnal is 14 Leo, 35. So that's about 20 degrees difference for when the person is 20 years old. And that's the error that you would expect using this system. So the consequences of using the standard method for calculating progressions and directions. In spite of the accuracy of a birth time, progressions and directions become increasingly more inaccurate with each passing year. This makes precision calculations using the progress and solar arc planetary aspects and midpoints increasingly less accurate over time. And it reduces the accuracy of rectification techniques that use progressions and solar arc directions. And it increases the errors in electional astrology due to timing errors, and reduces the accuracy of doing progressions and directions on institutions and countries that are over 100 years old. This has implications for both mundane and financial astrologers. Now, I want to come back to this bullet here where we talked about reducing the accuracy of rectification techniques. For instance, say you had a client who knew his birth time to the second, but as an astrologer, you really didn't know that. You attempted to rectify it. And suppose you picked an event for when they were 5 years old, then another event when they were 10 years old, another event when they were 30 years old. Well, if you rectified it perfectly, the 5-year-old event would be 5 days off. The event you selected when they were 10 years old would be 10 days off, and the event you selected when they were 30 years old would be 30 days off. And so it makes it difficult to rectify charts if you're using the standard solar day equal year. So how to correct secondary and tertiary progressions and solar arc directions in astrological software? Some astrology programs have two options for calculating the progress chart. The standard method is commonly known as Q2, and the Bezier method is known as Q1 in solar fire. We've already talked about how the tertiaries can be corrected, so I won't repeat that. So, how to set the Bezier solar arc and secondary progress charts in solar fire. And the way we do that is we would click on Preferences, Edit Settings, and Progressions and Directions, and this dialog box would pop up, and then we would select the chart angle progression, which would be solar arc in longitude. And then for the progress day type, we would just click Bezier correction there. And then we'd click OK, and we'd be good to go. For Kepler 8 and Sirius, we would select Progress Chart, select Progress Chart Desired, and number of days in a year or month. And the dialog box below would pop up. And then for the Bezier secondary progression, we simply just put a check mark in this box, and it will populate with this number. And if we wanted to use tertiaries, we put a check mark in this box, and it will populate with the appropriate number. Now, for minors, you don't want to ever check this box because it doesn't need to be corrected. But you can use this to put your own custom progression. For instance, if you wanted to do 4 days equal a year, you would calculate the number of days equal how many calendar days one progress date is equal to, and you would put that in this box. We'll come back to that later. Okay, so how to add other fractal progressions and directions to astrology software. So we have the standard method, which we now know is incorrect. And now we want to look at the Bezier progression rate. So you can define your own rate by simply working out the required ratio. If you wish to use the Bezier progression, 1 solar day equal 366.24 days, the ratio would be 1 over this number. and that equals this ratio. This value would be entered for programs that have a user rate option for progressions that are not included in their program. Now, SolarFire and Janus have this option built in. And Kepler 8 does it a different way, which we'll get to in a minute. And so let's go back to the SolarFire slide for a minute. And here we have rate for user progression. So you put that number right in this box and just click OK. So in general, to add additional fractal progressions to astrological software, you simply compute the number of calendar days equivalent to one progress day. For example, to compute the number of calendar days, one Bezier progress day is equal to, for quarterly progressions, 4 days equal 1 year, you would simply divide 4 divided by this number, and this would tell you that one progress day is equal to 91.56, etc. days. And thus the ratio would be simply this number here. And for SolarFire and Janus, you enter the ratio. And for Kepler 8 and Sirius, you enter the number of days equal to one progress day. And you do and for tertiary progressions, we do the same calculation here. These are just and quarterly progressions. You would, of course, the standard method we know is not correct, so you always want to use the Bezier method. So you would always use this formula here. 4 solar days equal to 366.2421992, and that you would enter. So you use the ratio for SolarFire and Janus, and you use the actual progress date for Kepler and Sirius. And the same for 52 days, which we won't go over that. And for 12 days equal a year, it's the same calculation. And for Janus, so for Janus, we would click on Settings, Custom Progression Rate, and this dialog box would pop up. And then for Bezier progression, we would type in Bezier secondary, and then we type in the ratio in this box, and then we click Save, and we would be done with that. And Janus has options so you can add more. So if you wanted to, you could add quarterly progressions here and tertiary progressions. Now, suppose your program lacks a Bezier progression or a custom progression option. You can use Google Assistant to calculate corrections. For example, if you were 60 years old and the standard method of progressing stated that an aspect was exact on June 21st, 2019, the corrected date would be 60 days later. You can ask Google Assistant 60 days from June 21st, 2019, and Google will respond with Tuesday, August 20th, 2019. Google Assistant, of course, is available for Android and Apple iPhones and tablets. Currently, no astrological program automatically adjusts Van Dam primaries when the Bezier option is selected for progressions. So you may have to use Google Assistant to adjust these dates. And some final thoughts. Unfortunately, it will take many decades to update astrology books. However, astrological schools like KeplerCollege and the Faculty of Astrological Studies can update their curriculum to reflect the Bezier calculations of secondary and tertiary and other fractal progressions and solar arc directions. And astrological software manufacturers can greatly accelerate this process by making the correct procedure the default in their future software updates. And users like you can request Bezier options be added to your software. After all, software manufacturers are in the business to please their customers. And also, options to be able to add to your own fractal progressions and directions. For example, 4 sidereal days equal 1 year. And where possible, substitute the Hermetic calculations for minor and tertiary progressions rather than the mean calculations. An example of a Hermetic tertiary progression would be to progress the tertiary progress sun at the rate of the secondary progress moon. When the secondary progress moon returns to its natal place, the tertiary progress sun will return to its natal place. The Hermetic minor progressions are already available in some astrological programs. However, they're not available in Solar Fire. And one of the things that I've noticed when I try to do minor progressions in Solar Fire is invariably when my natal sun returns to its natal place, the minor progress moon may be off by about 5 days or so. And references. I wanted to read this little quote at the bottom. Johndro comments that when his techniques are used, orbs of influence are probably never necessary if we take the trouble to refer every direction to the plane, ecliptic or right ascension, consistent with the nature of the event. I thought that was interesting. Now, Johndro's books are out of print, but there are a couple of pages that I wish I'd looked at 40 years ago where he outlines 12 of his techniques. So I scanned them to share with the group today because he was, as I said, an empirical astrologer. And he was a scientist. So I'm as a scientist myself. In fact, I started off as a physics major myself, though I got my first degree in chemistry. I understand the indoctrination and training he went through. So I know that when he puts a technique in his book, he's tested it. Because for scientists, data is our God. It's everything. And so he has 12 of his techniques he listed in The Earth in the Heavens, and thought that you might want to take a look at some of these because he had some really great ideas. Here's one that I noticed now. The 165-degree aspect. Now, by the way, this book was written in 1929. Now, I know Noel Till has made the 165-degree aspect popular among some circles, but Johndro had mentioned that all multiples of 15 degrees are aspects, and so he was the first one I know of to mention the 165-degree aspect. So I think you'll find just going through that at your leisure is not something we can talk about today because it's certainly beyond the scope of this talk. I'm not sure I would be able to explain everything he's mentioned here. But for your own future experimentation and perusal, you may find it of great interest. And you can reach me here. And now I'm ready for questions. And also, while we're doing questions, I'll share my screen and actually bring up some Astral software and make some of these changes. We'll start with Solar Fire if I can find it here. Here we go. Okay, so I'm just going to demonstrate what I talked about. So we go to Preferences and Edit Settings and Progressions and Directions will pop up, and then we will select here there are a number of options. I use Solar Arc and Longitude and just select Bija, and then you're done. Now, I had entered quarterly progressions in this window already, so it's already there. And okay, now if I wanted to calculate a quarterly progression, I would simply just go to Chart, Transit Progressions, and go down here to the user progress date, user rate. And I would select that, and it would bring up my user rate. And these are quarterlies, and just click on that and click that, and there it is. It appears. And so, when I look at that, my quarterlies for today, view. Interestingly, today I'm giving a lecture, and my quarterly progress Mercury is very close conjunction to my midheaven today. Very interesting, huh?
That is interesting.
Yeah, I recommend that you experiment with the quarterlies, the Bija corrected uh, quarterlies. So that's solar fire. And now I will share my window again. And okay, so here, if we wanted to, am I sharing? Let's see what we got here. What? Okay, let me get out of this. Cancel. All right. So let's go here. And then we would select the progress chart. And it would bring up this menu. I already have secondary selected. And I would check this window to make sure that the progress midheaven method is solar arc. And then I would click on number of days in a year. And it pops up this window. I've already checked the Bija here and the Bija there. And I had already entered my 4 days equal a year in this window. So one progress day for quarterlies is 91.560 days. And so in Kepler 8 and in Sirius, you enter the actual number of days that the progress day is equal to. Then you just click OK and off you go. And I'll share my screen again.
Quick question as you're going through this. Someone wanted to know about Sirius. Does it matter which type of progressed MC you choose?
You know, I would recommend that you choose a solar arc, because you always want to use the true. Let's take a look at the options first of all. Let's see what the options are again. Okay, now let me go back to the natal chart here, and let's look at the options. I recommend that you use. Okay, down here we have, what are the options? Okay, you don't want to use the mean. I find that I get my best results with solar arc, true solar arc. So that's the one I always use. That's one I recommend.
Great, thank you.
All right, so we'll stop that share. And so here's Janice. And for this one, we go to settings and custom progress rates. And then you would type in your Bija secondary progressions there and the ratio, and it would show up over here. And then you click save and you're done. Okay. And we'll stop share. And I'll bring back my share screen. Okay. So are there any questions?
Thanks so much. So we have 1 minute left. I think, let's see this, let's see, Omari asked the question, did you use electional astrology for your wedding day?
I did, but I had limitations. So I wasn't able to do what I wanted to do. You know, I'm now a firm believer that you get the wedding chart that you are karmically supposed to get. You can try, but you know there are other factors that play into that are beyond your control.